Greetings from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. I'm Sandra Arthur and I'm the author of 6 books. Thank you for your interest in my recent historical fiction, Against My Will, Lithuania to Freedom. I've received a lot of questions from readers eager to learn more about the true story behind my novel. People seem curious about the details of the long-lost history behind this story that spans 6 countries: Lithuania, Poland, Germany, France, United Kingdom and Canada. So let's buckle up, let's go on a whirlwind ride and learn more about my historical research. The plight of ethnically Polish families in Lithuania during World War II has rarely been reported. Many documents and oral histories of the period have been lost, and what little information that does exist is not, sadly, in English. For me, anyway. The story is based on the early life of my father-in-law, Artur Zylinski. He came from a mixed Lithuanian-Polish family and was born in Arturs, Lithuania. He was one of thousands of young men who were conscripted by the Nazis during World War II to work for them against their will. Although fictionalized, my novel is based upon Artur's true story. It follows his ordeal as he is captured by the Nazis, then his encounters with the French resistance forces. As the story progresses, Artur experiences the hardship of prisoner of war camp and the relief in finally joining the Polish freedom fighters. Meanwhile, his distraught mother faces a roller coaster journey of heartbreaking events behind the Iron Curtain. First her husband and then 4 sons, one by one, meet their death, depart or disappear. This all happened due to the horrific upheavals of World War II from 1939, and for this family the ordeal continued until the mid-1960s. Now then, I bet there are some people who may still be yearning to learn what may have happened to a long-lost relative during World War II. You'll learn how important the Red Cross tracing service is to not only characters in my book, but how it could perhaps help you. Between 1945 and 1950, over 14 million inquiries were received, and the Red Cross was able to provide information on about 2/3 of the cases. It took over 15 years of research to uncover the many facets of this real story. So here's the background to the true story of Artur Zylinski. I tried to find out information about the history of what happened to young men in Lithuania and Poland who were conscripted by the Nazis during World War II. I couldn't find any reports online. Perhaps this information exists in Polish or Lithuanian. For the people living in the West, this part of history is not well known. More recently, I discovered that from approximately 220,000 men who joined the Polish Freedom Army in the United Kingdom during World War II, a staggering 89,000 of them had originally been conscripted by the Nazis. These brave souls had escaped and somehow got to the UK to join up. There are also thousands of other young men who were conscripted by the Nazis, but they never survived the war, or if they did, they returned back to the East only to be imprisoned or killed behind the Iron Curtain. The story is therefore not unusual, however, it is not widely told. I felt it was important to discover more so it could serve as a tribute to my father-in-law and to the many young men of his generation who faced a similar fate. And I'm hoping my novel might help a new generation understand what may have occurred to their relatives. So let's learn more about my research. We'll start by hearing from my husband, the youngest son of Artur Zylinski.
My father didn't talk a lot about his upbringing. We knew he'd been taken away as a kid from Lithuania, and we knew that he'd gotten to the UK. He'd been with the Germans in France in a labor camp, was what we understood. He told about how he walked away from the Germans on the back of a truck, slow-moving truck. So this is sort of what we understood, but he didn't really talk much about it, so we didn't have a lot of detail. In fact, the way he described it wasn't really dramatic at all. So it wasn't until I met my cousin in France, and he had his mother visiting, who turned out to be a retired judge from Poland, and she actually had quite a bit of background about the family dates, where they were, and she told us the story that he was conscripted against his will to join the Nazis. So then we realized that he'd made a kind of escape, and it became a pretty dramatic story. She also told us some interesting stuff about his family. For example, how my father's brother, who had stayed behind the Iron Curtain, so we didn't have a chance to really communicate with him very much, but how he had hidden out during the war by living in a basement somewhere in Kaunas, which was pretty interesting, and he survived by going in the woods and finding food, and somehow managed to not fight during the Second World War and survive and to live a happy, healthy life in the end.
A few years later, we attended a family wedding in Poland, and this included a trip to Gdansk. Here, my husband has another relative who was a retired doctor. While I was resting, this cousin remembered she had inherited a box of photographs and papers from my father-in-law's brother. This box provided us with details of his school report and long-lost photographs of the family. It was surprising to learn Polish boys in Lithuania had to leave school at only 14 years old. That's during the Second World War period. This cousin knew family history and was able to share a lot of information. She also shared details of what happened in Gdansk and Warsaw after the war. Amazingly, she knew where the family had lived in Vilnius. She also shared that ethnic Polish families were told and certainly encouraged to leave Lithuania and go west. That's why the family moved out of Lithuania at the end of the war. Life was not easy, and they faced years of rebuilding Polish cities as well as shortages of food and basic necessities.
My father died at quite a young age. In fact, he was in his early 60s. He'd just retired from his professor job at Queen's in Canada. And so I didn't have a chance to really talk a lot to him about his wartime experiences. I wasn't thinking about it at that time. And my mother didn't know a whole lot. She knew some things, and she remembered this information about him coming from France, but she also didn't know that he was really part of the German army. And I think when I reflect back on that, it's because he didn't really talk about that. He didn't position it as he was part of the German army. I think it would have been very awkward, especially right after the war, when there would have been a huge amount of prejudice and bias. If you'd said you were in the German army, there was already prejudice against Poles just because they were immigrants, for example, in the UK. So after my mother died in 2018, we were going through the house and we found quite a lot of my dad's old material. In fact, down the back of a drawer somewhere, we found this journal that he'd kept right after the war. So in fact, in that journal, he wrote quite a lot of his life story, and then he wrote a lot of daily affairs after that for the 50s and 60s when he was living in the UK. So this really opened up a lot of information for my wife's novel. And also we found his war medals and some more photographs. We're able to look at some of the people and get to know some of the more of the background of the story from these things we found. So it really opened the door. And it also emphasized, by reading his journal, he spelled it out. He didn't have a choice. He was told, you have to join the army or you're going to be shot or sent to a concentration camp. So not really much of a choice. So we think that we understand why he did what he did. And so it really explained this choice that he made, which at the end of the day changed his life forever.
Key people I based my novel on were all dead, so to do justice to the story and to be true to history, I cast my net wide. In addition to information received from family members, I also read as many articles, reports and books as I could find. The death toll during World War II was horrendous. Worldwide, it's estimated 70 to 85 million people died across 58 countries. It's worth reminding ourselves which countries received the highest death counts.
The Victory in Europe celebrations occurred in 1946, the Poles weren't invited for political reasons. It was very sensitive with Stalin and the Soviet Union at that time. So they were not invited to that Victory in Europe parade, even though they were the fourth largest group in the Allies fighting. So this was kind of a snub for the Polish Free Forces, of which my father was part of. So finally that was rectified in 2005 when the Poles were invited and in fact led the march that year in London for Victory in Europe. Sadly, that was too late for my father and his colleagues, passed away by then, but it is some kind of justice towards the Poles in World War II.
So now I won't share any more details of the novel, but I hope you will find it interesting to read. It's available as a low-cost ebook or paperback book, which you can order from your favorite bookshop or online at Amazon. Please visit my Facebook page at Sandra Arthur Books, where I will keep you updated on my news, and I thank you once again for your interest.